Banana breakdown here. We've all done it, haven't we? Spared that one pathetic enemy who's cowering in the corner, more out of pity than mercy. But what happens when that snivelling creature becomes the most important NPC in your entire campaign? Today I'm sharing the tale of Nobble the Goblin, from trembling captive to accidental legend, and how our DM's throwaway character ended up stealing the show in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. It all began in the Caves of Chaos, just outside the village of Omelette. There's this suspicious village elder that hires adventurers to clear out goblins and promises a generous reward, probably hiding terrible secrets. You know the drill. Our party was fairly standard. Valen the human fighter who took himself far too seriously, Lyra the elven wizard who took herself even more seriously, Tom the halfling rogue who took nothing seriously, Carver the dragonborn cleric who was perpetually disappointed in all of us, and myself, a half-elf bard who was mostly there to document everyone else's poor decisions. After dispatching what seemed like the entire goblin population of the Eastern Realms, our rogue spotted movement behind some barrels. There he was. The sorriest excuse for a goblin I've ever laid eyes on. Scrawny as a half-starved cat, with armour cobbled together from what appeared to be cooking pots, and a helmet that kept sliding down over his eyes every 5 seconds. The fighter immediately reached for his sword, the wizard had a firebolt half-cast, and even the cleric looked ready to introduce this goblin to her deity personally. But something about this pathetic creature, the way he kept adjusting his helmet only for it to immediately slide down again, made me intervene.
Nobble be good. Nobble show shiny things. Nobble know where Big Boss hides special treasure. Please, no stab Nobble.
I'll never forget our DM's expression as I argued to keep the goblin alive. This wasn't just irritation. This was the special brand of exasperation that comes when a player derails your entire carefully planned evening. I rolled to convince the party, and well, sometimes the dice gods have a strange sense of humour. Against all reason and the fighter's very vocal objections, Nobble was temporarily inducted into our party as a guide. Our DM made it abundantly clear through his eye rolling that this goblin was supposed to give us some quick information and then meet his maker. But Nobble, it turned out, had other plans. Have you ever given a child a simple task, only to watch them turn it into a catastrophe of biblical proportions? That was Nobble with literally everything we asked him to do. Holding a torch, somehow set the fighter's cape ablaze. Setting up camp, managed to pitch a tent that collapsed the moment anyone breathed near it. Standing guard, found him fast asleep, using his oversized helmet as a pillow. What started as a temporary arrangement quickly became permanent. Much to our DM's disappointment, his repeated attempts to separate us from our goblin companion through various plot devices were met with increasingly elaborate rescue plans. About 2 weeks into our journey, we were ambushed by bandits on the old forest road. Standard fare, 6 of them, one with slightly better armour, indicating the leader. While we engaged, Nobble executed what he called his special battle tactic, climbing into an empty barrel and pulling the lid shut. What happened next became the first entry in what we later called Nobble's luck. As the bandit leader tried to flank our wizard, Nobble's barrel, which he'd accidentally positioned on a slight incline, began rolling. It picked up speed, careened down the hill, and slammed directly into the bandit leader's legs just as he was about to strike. The fighter stared at the groaning bandit leader, then at the barrel now cracked open with Nobble's trembling form inside.
Did he do that on purpose?
The fighter asked. The goblin looked as surprised as anyone.
Nobble, help.
And that's when the most dangerous idea in all of adventuring was born. What if Nobble's incompetence was actually his greatest strength? Over the next few months, Nobble became our unofficial mascot. We upgraded his rusty dagger to a short sword that he could barely lift, found him armour that almost fit, only 3 sizes too large, and the cleric reluctantly taught him basic first aid, which mostly consisted of bandage goes on wound, not on face. The transformation was, well, calling it remarkable would be overselling it. He was still a disaster, but now he was our disaster. He'd gone from constantly muttering,
Please no kill Nobble,
to occasionally saying,
Nobble, part of team, maybe.
with a hopeful inflection that made even the fighter grunt in reluctant agreement. His accidental heroics continued with impressive consistency. He tripped over a root and face planted into a pressure plate, accidentally disarming a trap that would have skewered the rogue. He got spooked by a spider and ran, screaming, directly into a hidden door we'd spent hours searching for. He dropped our last healing potion, which rolled perfectly between the bars of a cell, allowing the captured wizard to heal himself. When we arrived at the town of Greenhill, the locals were initially horrified to see a goblin walking freely among humans, but after Nobble accidentally foiled a pickpocket by getting tangled in the thief's legs while running from a stray cat, opinions began to shift. The most fascinating part was watching Nobble himself change. He began standing a bit straighter, though still hunched by human standards. He started mimicking our fighters' combat stances, though the effect was somewhat undermined by his helmet constantly falling over his eyes. During planning sessions, he'd occasionally offer suggestions that weren't completely terrible. If you told me that the goblin we spared would one day save the entire region from unspeakable horror, I'd have laughed in your face. But sometimes the most unlikely heroes are forged through a combination of incredible luck and the bare minimum of competence. 6 months into our adventure, the true threat emerged. People had been disappearing from villages across the region. Strange symbols appeared carved into trees. Animals fled from certain areas of the forest. Classic signs of a cult that's up to no good. We eventually tracked the source to an ancient temple deep within the Darkwood Forest. The cult of the Eternal Shadow had been operating there for decades, slowly working towards summoning their patron, a being known only as the Darkness Between Stars. The night before our assault on the temple, we prepared as best we could. The fighter sharpened his blade, the wizard reviewed her spells. The cleric prayed for divine guidance. The rogue checked his poisons. And Nobble, he was meticulously organising his pack. The same one we'd filled with spare potions, bandages, and emergency supplies. It was perhaps the first truly competent thing we'd seen him do. When the fighter remarked on this, Nobble looked up with unusual seriousness.
Nobble carry important things. Nobble not want to drop or lose. Friends need these if hurt.
Something had changed in our goblin companion. After months of accidental heroics, perhaps a tiny bit of actual heroism had taken root. The fighter, ever the stoic, merely grunted in acknowledgement, but later I caught him showing Nobble how to properly secure the pack's straps. We entered the temple at dawn, with Nobble, now our official equipment bearer, nervously bringing up the rear. The plan was simple. He would stay back, keep the supplies safe, and if everything went wrong, run for help. What could possibly go wrong with that? The temple was everything a proper cult headquarters should be. Shadows that moved independently of light sources, ominous chanting echoing through halls, and cultists with the fashion sense to wear those dramatic hooded robes. Very on brand. We fought our way through the outer chambers, with Nobble following at what he deemed a safe tactical distance. Approximately the maximum distance his short legs could sprint if things got dicey. The fighter cleared paths, with sweeping blade strikes. The wizard unleashed arcane havoc. The cleric sealed off shadow portals. And the rogue eliminated cult leaders with surgical precision. Then we reached the inner sanctum. Dozens of cultists surrounded a massive obsidian altar, upon which sat the Orb of Eternal Night, an artifact of unspeakable power. Leading the ritual was the cult's high priest, a figure whose face seemed to shift between human and something decidedly not. What followed was the most brutal fight of our campaign. The high priest unleashed shadow magic that drained life with a touch. Cultists swarmed us from all sides. The fighter fell first, then the rogue was cut off from the group. The wizard exhausted her highest spell slots, and still the ritual continued.
You are too late.
The high priest gloated, raising the orb above his head.
The darkness comes.
The cleric was on one knee, bleeding but still casting healing spells. I was down to my last few spell slots. The wizard was unconscious. The fighter was barely standing, separated from his weapon. The rogue was nowhere to be seen. That's when we heard it from behind a fallen column.
Nobble, Nobble, help friends.
What happened next has been debated by our group for years. Was it the bravest act of self-sacrifice we'd ever witnessed, or the luckiest act of desperate panic? Perhaps both. Nobble, with a strength born of pure terror, hurled his entire equipment pack directly at the high priest. The pack, which contained our remaining potions, holy water, alchemist's fire, and various magical oddities we'd collected, sailed through the air in what felt like slow motion. It struck the orb just as the final words of the summoning were uttered. The pack split open, its contents creating a perfect storm of magical chaos. Holy water splashed across unholy symbols. Alchemist's fire ignited ritual components. A forgotten scroll of counterspell unfurled mid-air, its magic activating upon contact with the orb's energy. The resulting magical backlash was spectacular. The ritual collapsed in on itself, creating a swirling vortex that pulled in the high priest and his inner circle. The orb cracked, then shattered, each fragment dissolving into motes of light that burnt away the shadows. And there stood Nobble, his oversized helmet halfway down his face, looking as shocked as anyone that he was still alive. The aftermath was almost as chaotic as the battle. The remaining cultists, seeing their leaders vanish and their god summoning thwarted, fled into the wilderness. The fighter finally found his sword. The wizard regained consciousness. The rogue reappeared from whatever shadow he'd been hiding in. The cleric collapsed from exhaustion. And Nobble, he was trying to pick up the scattered contents of his pack, muttering apologies for dropping everything. It took several minutes to convince him that he hadn't failed in his duties, that his failure had in fact saved everyone. When we returned to Greenhill, our reception was complicated. Yes, we'd saved the region from shadow demons, but we'd done so with the help of a goblin, traditionally not the most popular species in human settlements. The local lord was particularly skeptical.
This creature,
The lord said during the celebration feast, gesturing toward Nobble, who was unsuccessfully trying to use a fork,
is responsible for defeating the cult.
We all spoke at once, a jumble of absolutely. Saved us all, and surprisingly, yes. And so, in perhaps the most uncomfortable ceremony in Greenhill's history, Nobble was officially pardoned for all prior goblin-related activities, and granted a small plot of land and stipend in recognition of his service. 2 years later, the Lucky Goblin is the most popular tavern in the Eastern Lands. Adventurers come from miles around to hear Nobble's tale, which grows more elaborate with each telling. The helmet still doesn't fit properly, but now it's part of his brand. Our fighter visits every few months, officially to make sure the goblin hasn't burned the place down, but really to catch up with an old friend. The wizard has catalogued the Nobble effect in a scholarly paper titled Probability Manipulation in Non-Magical Entities. The cleric still grumbles that divine intervention would have been more reliable. The rogue occasionally sends new acquisitions to decorate the tavern walls. And me? I've got the best material for ballads a bard could ask for. A tale of unlikely heroism that actually happened to be true. Most of it, anyway. I may embellish the bit about Nobble's battle cry. This was something different, a tale from one of my many campaigns. If you've enjoyed this and want to hear another one of my many, many stories, let me know.
Banana breakdown out on